Hello there, and welcome to today's Gina Gardiner and Friends show. I have an amazing guest today, as always, Melody Garcia. She is an incredible lady, and I feel very privileged to call her my friend. She's one of the 7 coaches who's known to maximize human potential. She's a keynote speaker. She's a humanitarian ambassador, and she's done some amazing things. And she's a multimedia personality. Melody, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gina. It's always a pleasure to not only have a conversation with you, but I'm excited to be on your show. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's just a privilege. So would you please share with our listeners, tell them your story, because you have an amazing story to tell.
Well, thank you so much. Yes. So it started as we know, the deepest adversities that we face becomes the catalyst to our purpose, right, to our impact. So, just a bit of a background. I was born in the Philippines, and my parents were well known in the philanthropy, humanitarian, and my father was a doctor. And one of those takes, so I grew up in a household that my father used to add value and give his service for free, right, to families who were in need of medical help but couldn't afford it. So as a little girl, he used to take me at least once a month. I probably was 4 years old, where he would go to the impoverished areas, about 2 hours away from the city we lived in, and he would just set up his clinic, old school style of medical school, right? And
Yes.
just see patient after patient after patient. And then when he would find out that most of the patients can't even afford surgery, he would basically voluntarily waive his medical fees, because the one thing he always stood for is he took an oath to help save people's lives and not bleed them dry financially.
What an amazing man.
Absolutely, a massive impactor, and probably he was the single-handedly the person that planted this humanitarian seed
Yes.
that grew into massive trees that we're going to talk about. The other thing that he ingrained in me as we traveled back home, right, and this is something that stuck with me about humility and acts of service, is that he always used to tell me every time that, and again, starting at 4, he used to tell me, Melody, don't ever let success get so much in your head that you forget to help the people who needs you the most.
That's, I believe, such a powerful principle to live by. And I think if more people lived by that principle, we would live in a very different world.
And I love that, because it's what shaped the foundations of who
Yes.
I was to become in the future. Now, I grew up in a household, I would say, that was comfortable. We had maids. We went to the best private schools. And both my parents had that humanitarian philanthropic heart that extended to whoever needs help, we come help you.
Yes.
Well, we had a distant relative that decided, that was financially struggling from the province that he was living in. So my parents naturally invited him to come live with us in the city so he could find a job to support his family. And that is exactly what he did. This man, he's a distant relative of ours, came to live with us. And in doing so, hard times, he didn't have a college degree or any of that, or an formal education. He just took whatever job he can, so odds and ends job, to make ends meet. Unfortunately, in doing that, he came across government corrupt information.
Okay.
So for whatever the information he contained, he couldn't hold that information anymore to himself. So he actually set up a meeting with the media. And back in those days, Gina, it's not as easy as accessing television interviews, right?
I'm sure it wasn't.
Now you can just contact them and say, I want to be interviewed by you. But back in those days, the form of medium for an interview was a radio show.
Yes.
It was easier to access than being in front of a camera. So he made arrangements to appear on a radio show. And the day that he was on his way to meet with to go at the actual radio station, it was intercepted, and he was kidnapped by 5 armed men in front of my mother's place of business.
Goodness.
Who identified themselves as cops, and they weren't. And unfortunately, that led to a violent murder. He was murdered for the information on his part. And it was a horrific part of our lives, because I remember it was like high tension, and I couldn't understand as a little girl what was going on.
Yeah. How old were you?
I was less than 11 at that point.
Right.
Because it's what significantly changed our lives is that I know that he was violently murdered. They said that a gunshot wound to the head would have been kind. Just for the sake of sensitivity of the radio show, let's just say that, he was almost beyond recognition what they did to him. And my parents had to identify him 2 days. They found him basically he was thrown over a cliff.
Oh my goodness.
So whatever information he had contained was threatening enough that it was intercepted. And this kind of things that you think only happens on television, like movies,
Yes.
right? It almost sounds so made up, but it happened in reality. But that is what led to us having to disappear because the death threats came my family's way. Whoever was involved in this thought my parents had information because a relative was staying with us in our
Right.
home that we had no idea we were under surveillance.
That
And
must have been incredibly frightening for you, well, all of you, but particularly for your parents.
for my parents, because again, we were kids, so we were protected, right?
Yes.
From really understanding what happened. And my mother then, as I grew older, then was able to share more of what she went through. But this was psychological tactics that they would show up at her place of business and camp there, that they had pictures of me and my sister saying, if you speak up, the things we can do to them. So it was just, I can't even begin to imagine what my mother was going through and what my father was going through. But my recollection as a child was that we were pulled out of school.
Yes.
We were pulled out of school, right? And
Yes.
go on lockdown for a few days. There was just high tension in the air. And my last recollection of being home, meaning the Philippines, was being woken up in the middle of the night by maids saying, be quiet, as they were frantically packing whatever they could put in suitcases or luggages at the time. And there was a white man waiting for me, my sister, my mom, and we disappeared. That was it. When we emerged, so there was no goodbyes to relatives, there was no goodbye to friends. When we emerged, we were in the United States. So even if we've come to the US as tourists before, this is now having to leave everything behind and starting life with absolutely nothing but the grace of God and the mercy of relatives that we were staying. So imagine as a little girl, I go from having, attending private schools, having my own room, living a life of comfort, but still of service, to now finding myself sleeping on a floor with my sister, sharing the same bedroom with my mother. And this went on for a while. My mother, who was an entrepreneur and corporate manager at the same time, now having to humble herself to find whatever job she can to support her two daughters. And one of my pain points was really realizing what we lost.
Yes.
And that I thought it was temporary, and then to come to realization, no, this was a permanent situation. We're never going back home because our lives would be in danger, right?
I can only imagine how that must have been, but I have a parallel in the sense that I have recently opened my home to a Ukrainian refugee, and Irina, who's a wonderful lady, she has left her home. She's left everything behind just with a suitcase, but she's an adult, and I know it's incredibly difficult for her. However welcoming I may be, her life is not as she would choose it to be.
Absolutely.
When that happens as a child, it really is so pertinent in terms of how you develop and how you deal with it.
Seeing my mother go from a corporate management and an entrepreneur, then seeing her work at 7-Eleven, right, and sweeping gas stations in the middle of the night, did something to me. It hurt. It was a different type of pain because I could see the pain in her eyes, but it was on a survival mode because she was only making $3.25 an hour to support two daughters. And she had to hold another job, which was now working at a grocery store, right? Working at the deli on her feet all day, chopping vegetables and everything. And yet this was a former corporate leader,
Yes.
right? So you talk about humbling experiences of having to let go. And in fact, I remember asking her, when are we going home? When are we going home? And she sat me down and she said, this is home. This is home. This is the reality. And you're going to have to accept this. Keep all the good memories in your heart, but forget everything bad that's happened. Another part that was very challenging for me is that we had to leave my dad behind because he had to shut down everything and make it look normal in a way that we were sort of still there under the radars
Yes.
to protect us, right? So being separated from my father, just and it wasn't there was no good. It was like we were literally yanked, because if you look at it, to the parents out there, what would you do, and to protect your children?
But what I'd like to now focus on is you in your adult life and how you developed your philanthropic work, because that in itself, I believe, the story is quite miraculous.
Yeah, so fast forward to 2013, I'm now a mom, right? Corporate management. And the Philippines gets hit with a massive typhoon that is known actually to this day as one of the biggest typhoons or hurricanes, for those that are listening in the United States area, that made landfall at almost 200 miles per hour. And it hits the most devastated, already impoverished areas of the Philippines. And so the loss of life was imminent and it was rising. So, we have seen different types of global disasters.
Yes.
But this one had a different note, because it doesn't matter how long I've disappeared from the country, home was still home, and to see the devastation of life. And yet, and I'm going to talk to you, as a Christian woman, for those that are, I'm faith-based. I'd like to say that. And I respect everybody else's faith. But this one was the call that changed my life.
Okay.
Because as I was watching the news, there was something that I just felt, and I would say I call it the God whisper, right? That I make reference to. The God whisper that I basically was saying, something told me, stop watching mainstream media, stop, and go on the internet news. And at that time, nothing was censored from the Philippines. So I did follow that intuition, as I'd like to say it, and came across the news. It takes that one story to bring you to your knees in tears. And that's what this story was, coming across the news of a mother who lost her children, her husband, her entire family. But again, uncensored, I was watching this woman hold two of her babies who were less than 5 years old, lifeless, in her arms. And this is a mother's pain. I could instantly relate, and I can't even fathom what this woman's going through. That as she told her story, that they couldn't even bury her children because of the amount of debris, and it took 3 days for help to arrive. So she lost her husband, she lost her children, probably the rest of her family, every single belonging. And she had one question: why would God allow her to survive? It was a very valid question.
Certainly is. And I'm sure there are many people who have been through disaster who will have asked the same thing.
And it's the vulnerability of that human moment of, God, where are you, and why me? And why did you have to spare me? Because now I'm left with memories,
Yes.
painful memories at that, right, at the height of the devastation. It was enough that, Gina, I found myself on my knees crying so hard because I could feel this woman's pain on that loss, right? And I remember saying a prayer of just very simple, nothing eloquent, of saying, help me, help them, and activate every single gift you have given me to help me reach them. And then I went to bed crying. And then I woke up the next day with just this idea of, wait a minute, Melody, you sing. Why don't you put a small cabaret concert together that can help people, instead of just handing a $20 bill to the Red Cross or anything like that, right? Yeah. I wanted to do something more impactful. So, it was very interesting, for the interest of time, because I want to focus on the big elements that's happened since then. that idea with that epiphany, and remember that prayer that I said, activate all the gifts you've given me. Sometimes be careful what you pray for, because God will answer in the most tremendous ways.
It doesn't
Right?
do.
In the most tremendous ways. And here I am finding myself in situations that an idea that I had paved the way for miracles to happen. So I take it to Facebook. This was in 2013, calling all singers. Whoever wants to sing with me, I have an idea to put a small cabaret concert together. Within 24 hours, I had a flood of messages saying, we'll sing with you. We've heard of you. And I said, no one's getting paid. And they're like, that is perfectly fine. And then 2 days after that, amen, I said, now I need a nonprofit to partner up with. A nonprofit absolutely jumps in and said, sure. How many people are you planning on inviting? For some reason, this God whisper kept saying the number 20. And I said, 20. And they're like, that's it? And I said, well, it's 20 more people that can donate more than I can.
Okay.
The third day from that amen, and the reason why I'm saying, it's pivotal, I point back to that moment where I said that prayer, is because now I needed a venue. Understand that the venues were very expensive, facing the holidays, because this happened around 2000, like November was the storm,
Yes.
right, the hurricane. Now it's facing into December, and every single venue is either booked or wanted thousands and thousands of dollars, which to me, if I had it, then it'd be easier to just give that instead of trying to put this event together.
Absolutely.
Right. So I take it to Facebook. Facebook and I have this relationship of miracles, is what I call it. And I put out a plea, if there's anybody know of any venue, here's my plan, is to put together a little humanitarian benefit concert. 3 people who did not know each other gave me the same pastor's name.
Okay.
There's no such thing as coincidences.
I don't believe there is anything such thing as coincidence.
Right. So, and there's a saying that says, coincidence is the result of a God wink.
Oh, I've never heard that before. I like that.
So I called this pastor, told him my plan, and he even said to me, Melody, I have a very small church. It only holds 200 people. And I said, Pastor, I'm only trying to get a room for 20 people plus the singers. And he said, why 20? And I said, I don't know. God keeps telling me 20.
Okay.
So he said, give me 24 hours. Let me see what I can do. And I'll never forget this feeling, Gina. He called me while I was at my corporate job at that time. And he said, I have great news. I found a venue. It's going to be sponsored 100%. So no money's coming out of anyone's pocket. And of course, my first question is, does it hold 20 people? And he said, dear girl, you've been given a concert auditorium that has 650 seats for absolutely no cost. It's 100% sponsored. Here I was in shock. How can I have put together something in 72 hours? This has been unheard of. It takes months to prepare for a benefit concert, and yet somehow I had singers, I had a venue and a nonprofit in 72 hours.
Okay. And the outcome?
At no cost, right?
Yep.
So let's fast forward to 3 weeks. Every single sponsor that before I could even think of was provided. And this grew and grew and grew because I started getting messages from people I didn't know of saying, help us. You seem to be popular. Our parents' last name, known location was this. Help us, we're starving. The government ration is 1 can of sardines, 2 pounds of rice to feed a family of 6 to 8. Imagine my lack of sleep and a lot of tears.
I'm
hearing
sure.
the humanitarian call. End result, the reason why God kept saying 20, right? Because nearly 650 people showed up for this, by the way, just by word of mouth, just by miracles.
Brilliant.
Is that One Night, One Voice is the name of the benefit concert, ended up saving, not just serving, saving over 20,000 lives halfway around the world from the country I disappeared from. And in fact, one of the pivotal messages I received was from a recipient of something called CNN Hero of the Year, right? Which is a huge humanitarian benefit award that's given by CNN,
Yes.
which is a syndicate station, who wrote to me and said, "Oh, hero of your country, rise up. Your people need you." Imagine getting that message. And it took me back to the time that I had to disappear from this country because of government corruption. And now being charged with a message to rise up because my people need me.
There's
And
something very biblical about that, is there not?
yes, I had my Joseph moment, right? Of having to be removed from the nucleus of my culture, right? And to emerge into something that had access to be able to get to help them. And to just think that that one little benefit, it's like the little engine that could, right? That I was in a big name at that time. And then to have the end results, the data, pictures, videos, testimonials, seeing boots on the ground work, how that even connected halfway around the world, and to find out that it actually saved over 20,000 lives was the beginning of that destiny call.
It's an amazing story. What now? Where are you now? What have you been up to? And what are the plans? And I know that time is very short, so I'm going to have to ask you to give me the abridged version, and knowing that actually that's just the tip of the iceberg.
So the tip of the iceberg, I thought 20,000 was pretty special and it was my end all be all. And I went back to corporate life, but no, that was the joke. 20,000 was the beginning. By 2016, I created UNICEF Unite Orlando, which is an advocacy team that represents 192 countries in children global advocacy, right? So 20,000 was a drop in the water. It was the practice ground.
Okay.
So over the last, since 2016, I have led my team here in the state of Florida to meet with Congress. The least bit political person found herself in the steps of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., meeting with members of Congress from, senators and congressmen to advocate for children's rights on different platforms, which I'll be talking about. I also ended up leaving the corporate life in 2018 to launch into this roller coaster ride called an entrepreneur.
Yes,
right?
I know it well.
And I was like, what structure do I have? None. Perfect. Let's
Yeah.
go on this up and down motion. But it opened up speaking platforms. So I became a multiple award-winning international keynote speaker and have shared speaking platforms based on social conscious leadership, right?
Yeah.
Which means it's serving from the trenches to the global stages of charging people, charging that accountability of stepping up into their ethics, morality, and true sense of leadership that was founded by my father's teachings on me. Never let success get so much in your head that you forget, right? You forget to serve the people who need you the most, of bridging those gaps. How do I create awareness? How do I go? Because I've been known, and when I say big stages, I've shared the platform with the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, right? Tarana Burke, who's the founder of Me Too, Les Brown. I am 2 credits shy from my bachelor's degree, but Harvard University came calling for me to deliver a closing keynote speech about social conscious leadership. I've spoken on UNICEF summits. So this has just exponentially grown. We talked about multimedia. I'm about to launch a co-hosted television talk show that brings real impactors versus influencers, and I'm going to highlight about what's the difference on that, to the television forefront reality TV that's going to be streamed in 35 countries. I'm on 2 international magazines. So when you look at the global impact, I have met with different world leaders like the Dalai Lama, had a pleasure to meet with him, and also the Princess of Morocco to talk about global refugee crisis. Right? And when you say maximize the human potential, and it's one of the few certified psychoneuroactualization PNA coaches that's not open to the public. I was vetted for 3 years by one of the top behavioral scientists in the world by the name of Dr. Steve Maraboli. It is now being able to, I would like to say, take who I am, duplicate the systems I have, recognizing your own God-given talents, giving you a platform to launch. So guess what? It's a collaboration, not a competition of impacting and serving, right? At the end of the day, I talk about impact over influence in the shows and in my global stages and in my private meetings, because inspiration, Gina, I've been known to say this multiple times on stages, Inspiration can be found on a fortune cookie. It doesn't last.
No,
Right?
absolutely.
It doesn't last. You can look at a billboard, you can look at a sign, oh, that quote is so inspiring, and it's dopamine infused, and then it goes away. But when you create impact, this is what I call the transformational, right? Transformational process we go through of now rising up to take action, because impact, is demanding of action. Inspiration is a thought.
It's a conversation I would like to carry on, and I'm sure you're going to be back on the show, but I am very conscious of time.
Yes.
So where can people get hold of you?
So you can find me on Facebook under Melody Garcia. You can find me on Instagram at Melody Garcia VIP, right? And you can find me on melodygarcia.org. But the quickest way that people have been able to organically connect with me, believe it or not, is this relationship I have with social media. Because no matter how big, as people would say, I have gotten in this world, I still control my social media. I don't have a team, so I return messages, right?
Brilliant.
So I would love to be able to just share those, what can you do to serve the masses?
That's absolutely brilliant. It just remains for me to say to you a huge thank you, not just for being on the show, but for the work that you do and for being who you are, because you are a ray of sunshine in the world, and we need more rays of sunshine. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you as listeners for joining us. I'd love to hear from you. Please email me at Gina, Gina, at genuinely-u.com, or you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on LinkedIn. But thank you very much for joining us. Please spread the word, because for every 100 listeners, we donate a meal. And love to know what you think of the show. Melody, once again, thank you very much for joining us today.
And it is my absolute pleasure to always be on this show, Gina. I mean, what you're doing is a beautiful impact. And at the end of the day, that's the legacy we live. How deep have we served humanity?
Thank you. Absolutely so. So take care, and we'll see